Hello folks! Today, on our journey here in this New England excursion, we're going to take a journey back in time today to a time when things were a lot more simple in life. When you didn't have to worry about all the stresses of modern, urban living. Essentially, for most of American history until the Civil War, people lived like this in these small, isolated communities, away from being interconnected with the rest of the country. One such example of these isolated communities were the Shakers. As we're going through New England, I couldn't help but stop at a place where the Shakers lived. The Shakers mostly resided in New England, and that's why I had to find some place in New England that sort of preserved their culture in any way. We've explored or mentioned or talked about these isolated communities in America before, namely the Amish. But unlike the Amish, the Shakers are basically no longer intact as a vibrant community. Who knows what happened to them, but they're no longer living in this small community. It's beginning to rain. Oh well. The adventure continues, rain or shine. So with open arms, I welcome you to Canterbury, New Hampshire. Now, the Shakers were a group from England who established their beliefs. It was a denomination of Christianity, and by the 1780s or so, they formed all their little communities throughout America. This village in particular was founded around the 1790s, and it lasted until the earlier part of the 20th century. Here in this particular community, the Canterbury Shaker Village, these Shakers formed their own isolated society, and they had their own beliefs. A big notable belief of theirs was the idea of egalitarianism, where men, women, anyone should be treated as equals during a time when that wasn't usually the case. They also, during their worship services, were to be seen dancing around, screaming, being all ecstatic, and that's how they got the name Shakers, because they were seen to shake, I guess. You know, I really don't get it. It looks sunny and bright. Sure, there's a few clouds in the sky, but for some reason it's raining all over. I'm just trying to stay dry in between these little monologues I'm showing you all. Now, you can take a tour here. It does cost a little money, but I don't really like to take a tour if I don't have to. Like most isolated communities at that time, they were probably self-sufficient, these Shakers, growing their own fruits off of the tree. The natural way. I'm sure they probably cared more for their communities than communities and towns do today. Wouldn't it be interesting to go back in time and see how these people interacted with each other with a sense of brotherhood, friendship, camaraderie, I guess. In addition to their egalitarian communal lifestyle, the Shakers were quite the pacifist group. You wouldn't see any Shakers being enlisted in the war of the time, either Revolutionary War, maybe that was too early before they started this community, but maybe the War of 1812, the Civil War, maybe into World War I. You just wouldn't see them. They refused to partake in wars or battles. They were pacifist. These people were also known for their unique style of architecture. When you look at these old buildings, you can't help but think of a very isolated community in New England, and these buildings just remind you of this sense of peace. They were this old traditional society with their own beliefs, and I'm sure it was much more of a peaceful time. Another thing these Shakers were very much known for, and something that I found really interesting, is their unique sense of worship music. They had this very distinct style. No harmony, just a very melodic tune. And they wrote it down and preserved these tunes So you can still find them either online or where these pieces of music are archived. So in conclusion, although Shaker culture has largely disappeared from the American sphere of influence or culture in general here in America, you can still find bits and pieces, aspects of Shaker culture which have influenced American culture to this day, from architecture to music to probably food and how worship is done. Man, it would have been so cool to find, these large communities of Shakers still intact to this day. All over New England and even in other parts of America, you can still find the remnants of Shaker culture and these communities and societies, because lots of organizations have set up these outdoor museums, like the one here in the Canterbury Shaker Village, where you can at least get a small glimpse into what Shaker life was kind of like. If it isn't obvious, I just want to make this clear. These are not the original buildings. They're probably restorations. As you can see, a lot of work goes into making it look like it was back in the day. But good on them. Rather to be restorations than completely gone for good. Although there are no more Shakers in this here community in Canterbury, there's about maybe 2 or 3 legitimate Shakers left in this country, but you won't really find many Shakers, that's for sure, today. One of the Shakers' strongest values was this aim to have perfection. So this perfection manifested itself into all of their crafts, architecture, their sense of education for the youth, and their worship, of course. So, all in all, like many other religious communities, they aimed for this sense of perfection in all things in life. Wow, take a look at this scenic sight. The pond, the trees. One major problem for the Shakers in terms of sustaining the amount of followers to this faith was that they practiced celibacy, which meant they had to really rely on converts, just a constant flow of new people adhering to their community. This ultimately proved to be very tough for the Shakers to maintain their numbers. That could be a reason why they're all gone now. Even if you visit Canterbury Shaker Village and you don't go on a tour, it won't be hard to figure out what the purposes of each building were. So for example, this rustic stone and wood building was a pump mill built in 1905. So towards the latter days of this society, as I said before, this community spanned over 150 years. So it makes sense that some buildings were built later, some buildings were built earlier. That's just how communities develop, I guess. So that's all I can show you about the village. But we still have Canterbury itself. This was just an isolated community. There is actually a small town nearby. So let's go there too. Alright folks, welcome to the bustling town center of Canterbury, New Hampshire. That bustling part was complete sarcasm. Doesn't seem like anybody is here in this area. But I brought you all here because I think it's such a good idea to take a look at what a very, very small town is like in America. Even the smallest of towns and cities so far that we've covered on the coverage project, they have their own organized road network. There's all these different shops and businesses at least, but right here in Canterbury, seems like they just have a basic layout with just a few streets. There's the town hall, there's a library, and a church. There's another building, country store and post office, a little gazebo for the small town services, and then a cemetery. And that's really all you might need in a small town like Canterbury. This is not the exception. For a lot of America, in almost every state, you can find these very, very small towns that don't really have a lot, but they have the basics to keep a small population running. And you might think, okay, modernization in today's life has to at a few businesses, buildings, somewhere in the town, right? The answer to that is legitimately no. Not much is added. The only thing that I see is this elementary school, which seems like the newest building in this small town. And it's just amazing to think that 100, 150 years ago, this was the norm. Towns looked like this. You didn't have these big cities every 10 miles. Most of the time it was just your little community or the little place where your farm was, and that's what America was back in the day. Going back to colonial times or the start of this country itself, the only times people would go into the city was to trade or do commerce, bring their farm products to the market. Very few people lived in cities compared to the urbanization we see today. And those people who lived in the cities most of their life before industrialization had certain specialized jobs that you couldn't really have in these small towns and villages. I get that there's not much to do in these small cities, but I think that these small villages, these small towns, they really deserve a lot more media attention than they actually get in reality. The post office is in the store. Nothing like a good old country store in a small town. So I went into the country store and I bought some local cheese from Canterbury, New Hampshire. That's right here. Extra sharp cheddar and horseradish cheddar. I love cheese, so I'm gonna dig in. It's smoked cheese. Didn't read the label, but from the taste you can definitely tell it's smoked. Well, I'm gonna leave it at that. Canterbury, New Hampshire is a very cool place. Don't just explore the Canterbury Village. Explore the town itself too, as small as it is. It's a nice getaway from all the towns and the larger cities, right here in the heart of New England. So, enjoying this beautifully crafted, smoked, made sharp cheddar cheese from right here in Canterbury, New Hampshire. Actually, sharp cheddar's a Vermont thing. Oh well, whatever. Enjoying this cheese here in Canterbury, New Hampshire. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.